My name is Calvin Reed, and for 5 years after my wife died, I lived by rules no one had written down. Wake at 5. Grind the coffee by hand. Open the curtains in the kitchen before sunrise. Check the locks. Walk through the garage. Touch the handle of Eleanor's old gardening shears without moving them. Then begin the day. People thought routine kept me disciplined. They were wrong. Routine kept me from remembering too much. I was 66 years old, retired from a lifetime of repairing industrial equipment, and living alone in a quiet suburb outside Spokane, Washington. The houses on my street were spaced far enough apart for privacy, but close enough that everyone noticed when a strange car sat in a driveway after dark. Most mornings, the only sounds were sprinklers ticking across lawns, distant trucks on the highway, and the wind moving through the pines behind my property. My house had belonged to Eleanor and me for 38 years. We raised Brandon there. We argued there. We celebrated there. We buried 2 dogs beneath the maple tree in the backyard. Every room carried some trace of her. The blue curtains in the dining room, the chipped ceramic bowl beside the sink, the framed photograph from our 20th anniversary, where she was laughing because the wind had ruined her hair just before the picture was taken. I had never moved that photograph. I had never wanted to. Brandon used to tell me I should sell the place. Too much house for one person, he would say. Maybe it was. But grief does not measure rooms by square footage. It measures them by memory. A small house can still hold too much history to abandon. Brandon was my only son. 40 years old, broad-shouldered, clever when he wanted to be, and always one decision away from trouble. As a boy, he could talk himself out of anything. Broken windows, missed homework. A dent in my truck he swore had appeared by itself. Courtney, his wife, had the same talent, only sharper. She did not ask. She arranged. Every holiday dinner became her dinner. Every family gathering followed her schedule. If she disliked a restaurant, no one went there. If she wanted new furniture, Brandon bought it whether he could afford it or not. I tried not to judge. A father learns that criticism only pushes a grown son deeper into his wife's arms. So I kept my opinions to myself, offered help when asked, and watched Brandon slowly become quieter each year. The last time I had seen him before that night was nearly 3 months earlier. He had stopped by alone and asked to borrow $4,000. He called it a temporary cash flow issue. I called it the 3rd temporary cash flow issue in 18 months. Still, I gave him the money. He hugged me. He promised repayment. Neither of us mentioned it again. Then, just after midnight on a warm night near the end of August, headlights swept across my bedroom ceiling. First, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard tires crunch over the gravel beside the driveway. A car door slammed. Another followed. I sat up and glanced at the clock. 12:17 a.m. No one brings good news at that hour. I put on my robe and walked down the hallway without turning on the lights. Through the front window, I saw Brandon's SUV parked crooked across the driveway. The rear end sagged under the weight of whatever had been packed inside. 3 large duffel bags were strapped to the roof. More bags pressed against the back windows. Courtney climbed out first. She looked irritated, not frightened. Brandon remained behind the wheel for several seconds, gripping it with both hands. Even from the window, I could see the tension in his shoulders. Courtney said something to him. He shook his head. She said it again. Then he opened the door. The bell rang before I reached it. When I opened the door, Brandon stood with one hand shoved into his jacket pocket. Courtney stood slightly in front of him, as though she had been chosen to negotiate surrender. "Dad," Brandon said. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I looked past him at the vehicle. "What happened?" Courtney answered. "We ran into unexpected financial problems." The words came smoothly, practiced. I waited. She gave me nothing else. Brandon finally cleared his throat. "We need somewhere to stay, just for a while." "How long is a while?" Courtney's smile tightened. "We don't know yet. A few weeks, maybe. A couple of months at most." "Couple of months." She said it as casually as someone asking to store a box in the basement. I looked at my son. "Did you lose the house?" His jaw tightened. We don't want to get into all that tonight. That meant yes. Or something close enough to yes that the difference did not matter. I stepped aside. Bring your things in. Relief passed across Brandon's face so quickly, he probably thought I had missed it. Courtney kissed my cheek as she entered. Thank you, Calvin. We knew you'd understand. I noticed the wording. Not hoped. Knew. They carried in the first duffel bag together. Then the second. Then the third. After that came 2 suitcases, a garment bag, for cardboard boxes, a television, a computer monitor, a plastic container filled with kitchen equipment, and a framed print I had never seen before. This was not emergency luggage. This was relocation. I stood near the hallway and watched them fill the living room floor. Brandon would not meet my eyes. Courtney looked around as if measuring the walls. The guest room is still at the end of the hall? She asked. Yes. And the second bedroom? My study. We may need that too. The words landed between us. I let them. We'll talk in the morning, I said. Courtney glanced at Brandon. He looked away. Then she reached into her handbag. There's actually one thing we should go over now. She removed several pages, neatly stapled in the upper left corner. The title was centered across the top in bold capital letters. House Expectations. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Courtney held the pages toward me. We wrote these during the drive. Just basic boundaries so everyone can live together comfortably. Everyone. In my house. I took the document. The first rule stated that dinner should be prepared and ready by 7 each evening because Brandon needed a dependable schedule. The second said laundry should be done daily to prevent clutter. The third declared the garage off-limits until they had reorganized it for storage. The fourth said the living room furniture would be rearranged to create a more modern shared space. The fifth required quiet after 9:30. The sixth said personal keepsakes should be removed from common areas if they interfered with the new design. I read that one twice. Personal keepsakes. I looked toward Eleanor's photograph on the mantel. Courtney followed my eyes. We're not saying everything has to go, she said. Just that the house shouldn't feel frozen in the past. Brandon flinched. Barely. But I saw it. I turned to him. You agree with this? He rubbed the back of his neck. It's just a starting point, Dad. Courtney likes structure. So did your mother. Silence. Courtney drew in a slow breath. No one is disrespecting Eleanor. But we have to make this workable for all of us. I looked down at the list again. The paper did not shake in my hands. Neither did my voice. How long have you known you were coming here? Brandon stared at the floor. Courtney answered for him. A few days. A few days. They had known. They had packed. They had written rules. They had driven to my home after midnight, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they believed arriving late would leave me too tired to resist. I understood then that the financial trouble was only part of the reason they were standing in my hallway. The rest was confidence. They believed I was old, lonely, softened by grief. They believed gratitude would keep me obedient. I folded the pages once. Then again. Courtney's expression changed. Only slightly. Do you have any questions? She asked. No. Her shoulders relaxed. Brandon finally looked at me. Thanks, Dad. Seriously. We'll make this easy. I placed the folded list on the small table beneath the mirror. All right, I said. Courtney smiled. She thought she had won something. I showed them the guest room, brought extra towels from the linen closet, and helped Brandon carry the last box inside. Neither of them noticed when I glanced at the clock beside the bed. 1:06 a.m. They also did not know my mornings began at 5. Courtney closed the bedroom door behind her. I stood alone in the hallway, listening to their muffled voices. She laughed. Brandon did not. Then I walked into the kitchen and placed the coffee grinder on the counter. Beside it, I set the brass key to the garage. Their rules had arrived after midnight. Mine had been built over a lifetime. And in less than 4 hours, they were going to learn the difference. I slept less than 4 hours that night. Not because I was worried. Because I was thinking. There is a difference. Worry comes from not knowing what will happen. Thinking comes from recognizing exactly what is happening while everyone else believes you haven't noticed. I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds coming from the guest room. Drawers opening, boxes sliding across the floor, Courtney giving quiet instructions, Brandon answering with one-word responses that grew shorter as the night wore on. She was organizing before sunrise. That told me everything. Temporary guests don't unpack their entire lives. They live from suitcases. They wait. People planning to stay begin arranging furniture before they've even learned where the light switches are. At exactly 5 o'clock, my alarm sounded. I turned it off before the second beep. That had been my routine for decades. Nothing about this morning was going to change because 2 more people were sleeping under my roof. I shaved, pulled on my old work jeans, laced my boots. Then I walked into the kitchen. The coffee grinder Eleanor bought me nearly 20 years earlier sat exactly where I had left it. Electric grinders are quieter, faster, cleaner. This one sounded like a small tractor fighting for its life. Eleanor used to joke that the neighbors knew when we were awake because of that machine. She loved the smell it filled the house with. So did I. I poured the beans into the hopper, pressed the switch. The old motor roared to life. The noise echoed through the quiet house. For nearly 30 seconds, I smiled into my coffee mug. Some habits deserve to survive. While the kettle heated, I unlocked the back door and stepped outside. The morning air carried that cool bite Eastern Washington gets before sunrise. Dew covered the grass. The maple tree swayed gently above Eleanor's flower beds, now filled mostly with hardy perennials that somehow continued blooming despite my lack of gardening talent. The leaf blower waited beside the garage wall, bright orange, loud enough to wake the dead. I checked my watch. 5:14. Perfectly reasonable hour to clean your own yard. I pulled the starter cord. The engine coughed once, twice, then exploded into life. The sound bounced off every neighboring house. I began clearing leaves from the driveway even though there weren't many to clear. Not because they needed moving, because this was Tuesday. And Tuesdays were leaf blower mornings. Had been for years. After 20 minutes, I shut the engine off, rolled up the extension cord, and unlocked the garage. The brass key turned with the familiar click I had heard thousands of times. According to Courtney's list, the garage was now off-limits. Interesting. No one had mentioned changing the locks. I raised the overhead door. The old chain drive rattled loudly as it climbed toward the ceiling. Sunlight spilled across my workbench. Everything remained exactly where I had left it the previous afternoon. Socket sets lined up by size. Wrenches hanging in perfect rows. Wood clamps arranged by length. People laughed about my organization. They assumed retirement gave me too much free time. The truth was simpler. When your world falls apart once, you begin appreciating anything that stays exactly where you leave it. I switched on the fluorescent lights, then the small radio above the bench. Static filled the room before an old country station settled into focus. George Jones. Loud. Very loud. Louder than I usually kept it. Not outrageously loud. Just enough that someone trying to sleep 30 feet away might become aware that morning had officially begun. I began sorting a drawer full of screws that had already been sorted the previous week. 5 minutes later, I heard the back door slam. Heavy footsteps crossed the patio. Brandon appeared in the garage wearing sweatpants and the expression of a man who had slept through a fire alarm. "Dad." "Morning." He rubbed his eyes. "It's barely daylight." I looked toward the open garage door. The sun disagrees. The leaf blower. Needed using. The radio. I enjoy music while I work. He hesitated. Courtney was trying to sleep. I've been awake since 5. I know. He waited, apparently expecting an apology. None arrived. Instead, I selected another handful of screws and placed them into labeled containers. Brandon shifted awkwardly. Courtney thought maybe we could keep mornings quieter. I looked at him for several seconds, then smiled pleasantly. I'll think about it. Those 4 words satisfied him more than they should have. He nodded. Thanks. As he turned to leave, his eyes drifted across the garage. So, About the storage. What about it? We'll probably need some room. For our things. I glanced toward the shelves. Every box carried handwritten labels. Tax records. Camping gear. Christmas decorations. Eleanor's sewing supplies. Family photo albums. Nothing stacked carelessly. Nothing forgotten. I'm sure we'll figure something out, I said. He accepted the answer because he wanted to, not because it actually meant anything. After he went back inside, I continued exactly as before. By 7 o'clock, breakfast smells drifted from the kitchen. Bacon, eggs, toast. Courtney had taken over without asking. When I entered, she stood at the stove wearing one of Eleanor's old aprons. I stopped walking. She noticed. "Oh," she said brightly. "I found this in the drawer. I hope you don't mind." Mind. Interesting choice of word. The apron still carried tiny faded sunflowers Eleanor had embroidered by hand one winter while recovering from knee surgery. I remembered watching her sew them one by one. "No," I said quietly. "I don't mind." She smiled, believing permission had been granted. Brandon sat at the table scrolling through his phone. Courtney placed breakfast in front of him first, then herself, then finally one plate before me. She remained standing. "I was thinking," she said, "the living room gets much better light if the couch faces the other wall." I buttered my toast. "Does it?" "Ah, and that large cabinet beside the fireplace makes the room feel smaller." I looked toward the doorway leading into the living room. She continued, "We could move it into storage. The cabinet, Eleanor's cabinet, built by my father. Inside were wedding photographs, military medals, family Bibles, and 50 years of memories." Courtney spoke about it the way someone discusses replacing curtains. Brandon never looked up from his phone. "I'll help after breakfast," he said casually. Something settled inside me then. Not anger. Certainty. Neither of them had asked where anything belonged. Neither had wondered why it was there. They had already begun speaking about my home as though they were redesigning a property they had purchased. I finished my coffee, set the mug carefully into the sink, then looked at both of them. "I've got errands today." Courtney smiled. "Perfect. We'll get lots done while you're out." I returned her smile. Small, calm, almost grateful. "Don't move anything important." She laughed. "Oh, Calvin." Then she said the words that confirmed every suspicion I'd had since midnight. "We're just trying to make our house work better for everyone." Our house. Brandon didn't correct her. He simply nodded. I picked up my truck keys without another word. Some people reveal their intentions through arguments. Others reveal them through possession. They had been inside my home for less than 8 hours. And already they believed it belonged to them. I closed the front door behind me. Not hard, just firmly enough to hear the latch click. Then I stood on the porch for a moment, looking back through the living room window. Courtney was already pointing toward the fireplace. Brandon had finally stood up. He was moving toward Eleanor's cabinet. I did not drive far. At the end of the block, I pulled beneath a line of tall pines and watched my house through the rearview mirror. Brandon opened the front door 10 minutes later. He looked both ways before stepping onto the porch. Then he walked to the garage, raised the door, and began carrying my storage boxes outside. One by one, Courtney followed him with a roll of masking tape and a black marker. She pointed. He obeyed. Within half an hour, they had built a crooked wall of my belongings beside the driveway. Christmas decorations, fishing equipment, old tax records, the box containing Eleanor's sewing patterns. They had not even asked what was inside. Courtney wrote garage sale across the side. The letters were large enough for me to read from the end of the street. I remained still behind the wheel. A younger man might have driven back immediately. He might have shouted, demanded explanations, forced them to carry every box inside before breakfast had finished cooling. Age changes the way anger works. It does not weaken it. Teaches it patience. I took out my phone and photographed everything. The boxes, the garage, Courtney holding the marker, Brandon dragging my father's wooden cabinet through the front doorway while its legs scraped across the threshold. That sound reached me even through the closed windows of my truck. I felt it in my teeth. My father had built that cabinet during the winter of 1968. He used walnut he had saved for years, shaping every joint by hand in a workshop without heat. When he gave it to Eleanor and me as a wedding present, he told us good furniture should outlive the people who owned it. Courtney had been in my house for 9 hours. She was already deciding where my family history belonged. I drove away before they saw me. My first stop was a hardware store across town. I bought new padlocks, a small motion-activated camera, and 2 boxes of heavy plastic storage bins. The cashier glanced at the locks. Protecting something valuable? Something like that. My second stop was the bank. I asked for copies of every check I had written to Brandon during the previous 5 years. The clerk raised her eyebrows when she saw the total. $43,000. Loans for emergency repairs. Credit card payments. A down payment on a car. Money for a business opportunity that had never been mentioned again. For $1,000 3 months earlier. I had remembered each payment separately. Seeing them together was different. Numbers have a cold honesty memories sometimes avoid. I placed the copies in a folder. Then I drove home. By the time I returned, the living room no longer looked like mine. The couch faced the opposite wall. Eleanor's blue curtains had been removed. Her framed photographs were stacked face down on the dining table. The cabinet was gone. In its place stood Courtney's framed print, a pale abstract design that looked like spilled paint. She walked out of the kitchen smiling. Surprise. I looked around slowly. Brandon stood near the fireplace, hands in his pockets. "What do you think?" Courtney asked. "I think you've been busy. The room feels bigger now." "Where is the cabinet?" "In the garage," Brandon said. "And the photographs?" Courtney touched my arm lightly. "We packed the older ones safely. You can still look at them whenever you want." Whenever I wanted. As though memories required an appointment. I lifted one frame from the table. It showed Eleanor kneeling in the garden, laughing at something beyond the camera. Dirt covered her gloves. Sunlight caught the silver in her hair. Courtney watched me. "Calvin, we understand you're attached to these things, but living spaces have to evolve." I placed the photograph against my chest. "Who is we?" Her smile vanished for half a second. "All of us." "No, you said we. Who made these decisions?" Brandon stepped forward. "Dad, don't turn this into a fight." I looked at him. Did I sound like I was fighting? He stopped. That was the advantage of remaining calm. People who expect anger become unsettled when they cannot provoke it. Courtney folded her arms. "We thought you'd appreciate the help. I appreciate knowing how you think." She studied my face, unsure whether she had been thanked or warned. I carried Eleanor's photograph into my bedroom and locked the door behind me. That afternoon, Courtney invited 6 people to dinner. She did not ask. At 5:30, unfamiliar cars began filling the driveway. Men I had never met carried beer through my front door. 2 women walked directly into the kitchen and began opening cupboards. Someone turned music on in the living room. Someone else placed a wet glass on my father's side table without a coaster. Courtney introduced me as Brandon's dad, who lives with us, lives with us, in the house where I had paid every mortgage payment. One guest looked around and said, "You two landed in a great place." Courtney laughed. "We're making it ours." Brandon heard her. He lowered his eyes. I spent the evening sitting in the corner chair they had pushed beside the hallway. No one asked whether the gathering bothered me. No one asked permission to smoke on the patio or use Eleanor's serving dishes. I watched. I listened. I remembered names. When the last guest left shortly before midnight, empty bottles covered the kitchen counter. Food had dried onto plates. Mud marked the hallway floor. Courtney stretched and yawned. "Would you mind cleaning this up in the morning? We have an early appointment." I glanced at Brandon. He was already walking toward the guest room. "What appointment?" He stopped. Courtney answered from behind me. "Nothing important. Just paperwork." "What kind?" She picked up her purse. "Financial planning." There it was again. A smooth answer designed to end a conversation rather than explain anything. I nodded. Sleep well. After their bedroom door closed, I cleaned nothing. Instead, I returned to the garage. My father's cabinet stood behind stacked luggage, one door hanging partly open. Eleanor's keepsake boxes had been shoved beneath a folding table. The garage sale sign remained attached to one of them. I removed it carefully. Then I installed the camera above the workbench, where it could see the door, the shelves, and anyone entering. I photographed every displaced item, every scratch, every box, every label written in Courtney's hand. By the end of the week, their behavior had become bolder. They replaced my groceries with food Courtney preferred. They changed the password to the wireless internet. Brandon began parking in my side of the garage. Courtney forwarded some of their mail to my address and left the envelopes where I would notice them. Bank statements, collection notices, letters marked final demand. One afternoon, I heard her speaking on the patio. She thought I was asleep. Give him time, she told Brandon. Once he gets used to us being here, signing the house over will feel natural. There was a pause. Then my son answered. What if he says no? Courtney's voice became colder. He won't. I stood behind the kitchen wall, barely breathing. He's lonely, she continued. He needs us more than we need him. We just have to make him understand that this is the sensible choice. Brandon said nothing for a long time. Then he asked the question that ended whatever doubt remained inside me. How soon can the papers be ready? I returned silently to my bedroom, opened the folder from the bank, added the photographs. Then I wrote down every word I had heard. The next morning, while they slept through the sound of my coffee grinder, I called Rebecca Holloway. She had handled Eleanor's estate. She knew the trust. She knew the house. Most importantly, she knew me. When she answered, I closed my bedroom door. Rebecca, I said, I think my son and his wife are trying to take my home. Her voice changed immediately. Tell me everything. So I did. And for the first time since they arrived, my silence was no longer patience. It was evidence. Rebecca did not interrupt me once. That frightened me more than questions would have. I sat at the edge of my bed with the bedroom door locked, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper while Brandon and Courtney slept down the hall. I told Rebecca about the midnight arrival, the typed rules, the garage, the photographs, the mail, the guests, and the conversation I had overheard on the patio. When I finished, she remained silent for several seconds. Then she said, Do not confront them. I wasn't planning to. Good. Do not sign anything either. Not a delivery receipt, not a change of address form, not a birthday card if Courtney puts it under your nose. That's serious? Calvin, people do not discuss preparing papers unless someone has already spoken to them about preparing papers. I looked toward the bedroom door. You think they have a lawyer? I think we should assume they do. We agreed to meet that afternoon at her office in downtown Spokane. I left the house shortly after 10, carrying the bank folder in an old canvas tool bag. Courtney stood in the kitchen pouring coffee into one of Eleanor's porcelain cups. Where are you going? She asked. Hardware store. You went there yesterday. I forgot something. Her eyes rested on the bag. What's that? Something that needs fixing. That answer seemed to satisfy her. People hear what they expect when they believe they control you. Rebecca Holloway's office occupied the second floor of a brick building near the river. Eleanor had trusted her because Rebecca never softened difficult truths. She had guided us through wills, medical directives, and the trust that protected our house. After Eleanor died, Rebecca sat beside me while I signed documents I could barely see through grief. She looked older now. So did I, but her eyes were still sharp. She locked the office door after I entered. Show me everything. I spread the photographs across her conference table. The boxes beside the driveway, the garage sale sign, the moved furniture, Eleanor's pictures stacked face down, the collection notices addressed to Brandon and Courtney at my home. Then I showed her copies of the checks. Rebecca added the numbers twice. $43,000. That's what the bank says. Were these loans? Some were supposed to be. Any repayment agreements? No. Any repayments? I shook my head. She leaned back. This establishes dependence. It may also establish a pattern of financial pressure. I handed her the paper where I had written the patio conversation word for word. She read it slowly. Did anyone else hear this? No. Did you record it? No. Then it is your recollection. Useful but weaker than direct evidence. I felt foolish. She must have seen it. You did the right thing by writing it down immediately, she said. From now on, preserve everything. Messages, letters, receipts, recordings made where lawful, photographs, dates, names. Do not edit anything. Do not threaten them with it. Let them believe you are cooperating. I looked at her. You want me to play stupid? No. I want you to play exactly the role they have assigned you. Grieving, elderly, grateful for company. The words stung. Not because they were cruel, because they were accurate. Rebecca opened a thick file bearing my name. Inside rested the trust Eleanor and I had created years earlier. She turned several pages and tapped one paragraph. The house is already protected. How protected? Extremely. You have the right to live there for the rest of your life. Brandon cannot force a sale. You cannot casually transfer the property, even if someone pressures you. After your death, the trust controls what happens. I exhaled. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. Rebecca did not smile. Do not relax yet. Legal protection does not prevent harassment, forged documents, false claims of incapacity, or attempts to isolate you. Incapacity? If they cannot persuade you to sign willingly, they may try to argue that you no longer understand your affairs. I thought of Courtney calling me lonely, old, frozen in the past. Every phrase suddenly sounded less like criticism and more like preparation. What do? We strengthen the record. That afternoon I signed an updated declaration confirming my wishes. Rebecca arranged for an independent physician to document that I was mentally capable. She prepared notices preventing unauthorized changes to property records and instructed her staff to flag any inquiry involving my name, the trust, or the house. Then she gave me a small digital recorder. Use this only after we review Washington consent rules carefully, she said. For now, document conversations in writing immediately afterward. She also gave me one warning. Do not become cruel, Calvin. Calm people collect evidence. Angry people create evidence for the other side. I understood. When I returned home, Courtney had moved Eleanor's china into cardboard boxes. The boxes sat beside the back door. What's this? I asked. She glanced over from the dining table. We need cabinet space. For what? Our things. Brandon sat beside her with a laptop open. A document disappeared from the screen when I entered. Too late. I had seen the heading. Property transfer proposal. Courtney closed the computer. How was the hardware store? Productive. She smiled. I'm glad. For the next 2 weeks, I became the man they wanted me to be. Quiet, helpful, predictable. I prepared dinner by 7. I folded laundry when it was left in the hallway. I nodded while Courtney explained how much easier life would be if we combined finances. I listened while Brandon suggested adding his name to the utility accounts. I even allowed them to believe I was considering moving into the smaller bedroom so they could have the master suite. Their confidence grew. So did my file. Courtney sent me messages reminding me that the house would stay in the family if I made the right decision. Brandon emailed a spreadsheet showing how much money they claimed they would invest after taking ownership. They photographed rooms, measured windows, requested an estimate for replacing the roof without telling me. One evening, I found a real estate agent's card on the kitchen counter. I photographed it before it disappeared. Another morning, the garage camera captured Courtney opening my locked file cabinet with a key I had never given her. She searched through tax records for nearly 12 minutes. When she left, I checked the drawer. Copies of the trust were missing. I called Rebecca. Do not replace them, she said. Let her think you haven't noticed. 3 days later, Courtney approached me while I was watering Eleanor's flowers. She stood beside the maple tree with a folder pressed against her chest. "We should talk about the future." I turned off the hose. "What about it?" "Brandon worries about you living alone." "I'm not alone now." "Exactly. And we want to make that permanent." She opened the folder. Inside was a typed document. My name appeared at the top. Brandon's beneath it. Courtney held out a pen. "This isn't the final version," she said gently. "It just shows that you intend to transfer the house when the paperwork is ready." I looked toward the kitchen window. Brandon stood behind the glass, watching, waiting. I took the pen. Courtney's face softened with victory. Then I placed it back inside the folder. "I'd like Rebecca to review it." Her expression froze. "Rebecca? My attorney?" For the first time since she entered my home, Courtney looked afraid. Only for a second. Then she smiled. "Of course. We have nothing to hide." I nodded. "That's good." She did not know Rebecca had already seen the document. She did not know the garage camera had recorded her stealing trust papers. She did not know the property she planned to announce as hers on Labor Day had never been within her reach. But I knew something even more important. By asking for my signature, she had finally stopped pretending. And now the bill was ready to come due.